The dust-choked air of Silver Canyon, Nevada Territory, 1875, carried no mercy for those who breathed it, especially not for Katherine Novak as she swung her pickaxe against the unforgiving rock face. Her once delicate hands were now covered in blisters and calluses, bleeding from fresh wounds that never had time to heal. Every swing sent waves of pain through her slender frame, but she couldn't stop, not if she wanted to survive another day in this hellish silver mine that had become her prison. Katherine wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of grime across her face. At 22, she should have been planning her future, perhaps married with children by now. Instead, she was trapped by a contract her father had signed before his death, leaving her to work off his considerable gambling debts to the Silver Canyon Mining Company. 2 years she'd been here already, with 3 more to go according to the terms if she survived that long. "Move it, Novak." The foreman's voice echoed through the tunnel. "You're 6 buckets short of your quota today," Katherine bit back a retort. Speaking out had earned her no dinner yesterday. She adjusted the lantern hanging from a post nearby and resumed her work, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the ache in her back. The other miners, all men, gave her occasional sympathetic glances, but kept their distance. In a company town, showing kindness to someone marked by the bosses could make you their next target. As she filled another bucket with ore, Katherine felt a familiar dizziness wash over her. She hadn't eaten since the meager breakfast of hard biscuit and thin coffee provided to the workers at dawn. The company store charged extortionate prices for food, ensuring that the miners remained perpetually in debt. It was a vicious cycle: work to eat, or more; work harder, get sicker, or more still. "Water breaks over," the foreman shouted, though Katherine had taken no break. "Back to it." She steadied herself against the tunnel wall, took a shallow breath of the stale air, and lifted her pickaxe again. The weight of it seemed to have doubled since morning. 3 more hours until the end of her shift, and then the cramped, stifling dormitory that housed the few women workers, mostly widows or daughters of dead miners working off family debts. Katherine didn't hear the commotion at first. The constant clanging of metal on rock, the creaking of support beams, and her own labored breathing drowned out most sounds. It wasn't until the foreman's angry voice rose to a shout that she became aware something unusual was happening. "This is private property. You can't just ride in here making demands." The responding voice was calm but carried a steel edge that cut through the mine's ambient noise. "I have business with your boss, Mr. Hargrove. Either point me to his office or I'll find it myself." Katherine couldn't help herself. She turned toward the tunnel entrance, squinting through the dusty air. The silhouette standing there didn't belong: tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat that wasn't a miner's cap. "Get back to work." The foreman noticed her attention shift and strode toward her, raising his hand threateningly. Before the blow could fall, the stranger's voice cut through the air again. "You might want to reconsider that." The foreman froze, then slowly lowered his hand and turned around. "Mr. Hargrove's office is in the main building. This is a working mine. You've got no business here." "I'll decide where my business takes me." The stranger stepped further into the tunnel, and Katherine could finally see him clearly. Tall indeed, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the gun belt at his hip looked well used. Not a common outlaw, then. Something about the way he carried himself suggested authority, though not the cruel kind she'd grown accustomed to. His eyes scanned the mine, taking in the conditions with a frown before landing on Katherine. She quickly looked away, returning to her work. Drawing attention to herself would only mean trouble later. "Ladies working the face, that's not standard practice," the stranger said. "Mind your own affairs," the foreman growled. She's working off a contract, fair and square. The stranger's gaze lingered on Katherine for another moment before he turned away. I'll be speaking with Hargrove about several matters. This included. Katherine listened to the receding footsteps, not daring to look up again until they were gone. The foreman stood glaring after the stranger, his face flushed with anger. What are you all gawking at? Back to work. Anyone not meeting quota goes without supper. Katherine threw herself back into her task with renewed urgency, but her thoughts remained with the stranger. Visitors to the mine were rare, especially those who could make the foreman hesitate. Who was he? And why would he concern himself with the conditions here? It wouldn't matter, she decided. Tomorrow would be the same as today and the day after that. Nothing ever changed in Silver Canyon, except perhaps for the worse. By sunset, Katherine's arms felt like lead, and each breath burned in her chest. The Silver Canyon Mining Company worked its miners from dawn until dusk, 6 days a week. Sundays were reserved for mandatory church attendance, where the company preacher reminded them that their labor was God's will, and that paying their debts was moral obligation. As she trudged toward the women's dormitory, carrying her tools to be counted and checked in, Katherine caught sight of a commotion near the company office. The stranger from earlier stood on the porch, now accompanied by 2 other men. They were facing off against Hargrove, the mine owner, and several of his guards. "Your practices are illegal, Hargrove," the stranger was saying, his voice carrying across the yard. "The territorial governor will hear about this." Hargrove, a portly man with a perpetually red face, seemed unimpressed. "The contracts are binding, Grant. Your bleeding heart might play well in the territorial legislature, but business is business. These people owe debts and they're working them off as agreed. Under conditions that violate territorial labor laws," the man Grant countered. "Women working the face, 16-hour shifts, company scrip instead of real wages. The list goes on." Katherine slowed her pace, lingering to hear more. "Grant." The stranger had a name now. "Move along, Novak." One of the guards had noticed her eavesdropping. "Dormitories that way." Katherine hurried on, but not before hearing Hargrove's dismissive laugh. "You and your reformist friends can talk all you want. We have friends in higher places than the governor's mansion." She reached the tool check-in point, where the night foreman inspected her pickaxe and shovel with suspicious eyes, as if she might have somehow damaged company property on purpose. Once cleared, she continued to the women's dormitory, a long, low building with small windows and poor ventilation. Inside, the air was stifling. 20 narrow cots lined the walls with scarcely 2 feet between them. Most were already occupied by exhausted women preparing for sleep. Katherine made her way to her assigned bed, nodding greetings to the few women who acknowledged her. Martha, an older woman who had been working off her husband's debt for 8 years, shifted to make room for Katherine on the edge of her cot. "You're late," she observed quietly. "Got held up at tool check," Katherine replied, sinking down gratefully. Her legs trembled from fatigue. "Did you see the strangers by the office?" Martha nodded. "Nathan Grant. He's some kind of rancher turned politician from over Carson City way. Rumor is he's working with the territorial government now. He was in the mine today. Challenged Dobbs when he was about to hit me." Martha's eyes widened. "Be careful with hope, girl. Men like Hargrove don't give up their power easily, and men like Grant don't stay long enough to see things through." Katherine sighed, knowing Martha was right. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. She reached under her thin mattress and pulled out her most precious possession, a small, worn photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Her mother, beautiful and smiling, had died when Katherine was 14. Her father had turned to gambling after that, seeking solace in cards and whiskey until his debts overwhelmed him. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, carefully tucking the photograph away again. The next morning came too quickly. Catherine's body protested every movement as she rose before dawn, splashing her face with cold water from the communal basin. Breakfast was the usual hard biscuit and bitter coffee. She choked it down, knowing she needed every bit of strength for the day ahead. As the workers assembled in the yard for the morning head count, Katherine noticed an unusual amount of activity around the company office. Hargrove himself was there, along with several guards and a man in a suit she recognized as the company lawyer. "What's happening?" she whispered to Martha, who stood beside her in line. The older woman shrugged. "Trouble, most likely. Hargrove looks fit to burst." Before Katherine could respond, the mine foreman called for attention. "Listen up. Normal operations today. Section 3 workers will move to Section 4 due to yesterday's collapse. Anyone caught slacking will have their rations cut. That's all." As the workers began dispersing toward their assigned areas, Katherine saw Nathan Grant emerge from the company office. He was dressed the same as yesterday, but his expression was grimmer. Their eyes met briefly across the yard, and something in his gaze made Katherine's heart beat faster. Recognition, concern. She couldn't tell. The foreman's voice broke the moment. "Novak, Section 2 today. Move it." Katherine turned away and followed the stream of workers toward the mine entrance. Section 2 was deeper than her usual assignment, with poorer air circulation and higher risk of cave-ins. It was punishment, she realized, for drawing attention yesterday. The morning passed in a blur of exhaustion and pain. The deeper tunnel was hotter, the air thicker with dust. By midday, Katherine was lightheaded, her pickaxe strokes growing weaker. Several times she had to stop and lean against the wall, fighting waves of dizziness. During one such moment, she heard an unfamiliar voice behind her. "Miss Novak." Katherine turned, startled to find herself face to face with Nathan Grant. In the dim light of the mine, his features were shadowed, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "How do you know my name?" she managed. "I make it my business to know things," he replied, his voice low, "especially about people in trouble." Katherine glanced nervously at the other miners who were studiously ignoring the conversation. "You shouldn't be here. If the foreman sees you talking to me." "I've dealt with the foreman. He's otherwise occupied at the moment." Grant stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "I need to ask you something important. Your contract, do you have a copy?" Katherine shook her head. "No, my father signed it. After he died, Mr. Hargrove told me I was legally bound to work off his debt." "How much was the original debt?" $500, Katherine replied. "But with interest and charges for room and board, Mr. Hargrove says I still owe over $1,000. Grant's jaw tightened. "That's how they keep people here. The debt never gets smaller." He glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. "I'm working on something that might help you and the others, but I need time." "Time is something we don't have much of," Katherine said, gesturing to a woman in the corner who was coughing blood into a rag. "Many don't survive their contracts." "I know." His expression darkened. "I've seen it before, which is why what in hell's name are you doing in here?" The foreman's angry shout cut through their conversation. He was storming down the tunnel, face contorted with rage. "This is the last straw, Grant." Grant stepped away from Katherine, placing himself between her and the approaching foreman. "Just inspecting conditions as part of my report to the governor, Mr. Dobbs. No need for alarm. You're trespassing on company property and interfering with our workers." Dobbs reached for the club at his belt. "Guards, we've got an intruder." Katherine watched in horror as several armed men appeared at the tunnel entrance. Grant stood his ground, his hand hovering near his holster. "Think carefully, Dobbs," he said evenly. Violence against a territorial representative carries serious consequences. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, from outside came the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. "Sounds like my associates have arrived," Grant said, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. "I'd suggest we all remain civil." Dobbs hesitated, then slowly removed his hand from his club. "This isn't over, Grant. Hargrove has powerful friends." "So do I." Grant turned to Katherine. "Keep your head down, I'll be back." With that, he strode past the fuming foreman and out of the tunnel, leaving Katherine bewildered and, despite her best judgment, harboring a dangerous spark of hope. The rest of the day was agony. Word spread quickly through the mine about Grant's confrontation with the foreman, and the guards were particularly vicious in response. Katherine received no water break and was forced to continue working when others took their meager lunch. By the time the shift ended, she could barely stand. As she stumbled toward the tool check-in, Martha appeared at her side, supporting her discreetly. "Easy now," the older woman murmured. "You're being watched." Katherine glanced up to see Hargrove himself observing the returning workers, his small eyes fixed particularly on her. She straightened as best she could, determined not to show weakness. "Grant's still in town," Martha whispered as they passed their tools to the night foreman. "Staying at the Silver Eagle. They say he's been talking to miners who have left the company, gathering testimonies." "For what purpose?" Katherine asked, her voice hoarse from dust and thirst. "Legal action, maybe, or leverage for new legislation. Either way, Hargrove is worried enough that he's posted extra guards tonight." As if to confirm Martha's words, Katherine noticed armed men positioned at intervals around the company grounds more than usual, and alert rather than lounging as they typically did. "Something's coming," Martha said as they entered the dormitory. "I can feel it. Best be ready." "Ready for what?" Katherine sank onto her cot, too exhausted even to remove her boots. Martha's weathered face was grave in the dim lamplight. "Change, girl, and change is never painless." That night, Katherine dreamed of her father. In the dream, he was healthy again, before the gambling and drinking had hollowed him out. They stood together on the small farm where she'd grown up, the mountains of Nevada rising in the distance. "I'm sorry, Katie," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called her by. "I never meant for this to happen to you." "I know, Papa," she replied, though in waking life she had often resented him for the position his vices had left her in. "Help is coming," her father said, looking toward the horizon where a rider approached. "But you'll need courage." Katherine woke with a start, the dream still vivid. Outside, the sky was still dark, though a faint lightening at the eastern edge suggested dawn wasn't far off. Something had disturbed her sleep, a sound that didn't belong. She sat up, listening intently. There it was again, raised voices shouting, and something else, the crackling of flames. "Fire!" Someone screamed, and suddenly the dormitory was in chaos. Women leapt from their cots, grabbing what few possessions they had. Katherine stumbled to the window and peered out. The company store was ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the wooden structure. Men ran back and forth with buckets, but the fire had too much of a head start. "Everyone out," Martha called, appearing at Katherine's side. "This building could be next." They joined the stream of women rushing outside into the pre-dawn chill. The yard was in pandemonium. Miners from the men's dormitories had formed a bucket line to the well, while guards ran about shouting contradictory orders. "What happened?" Katherine asked a man passing with an empty bucket. "Someone said it," he replied without stopping. "Heard Dobbs say it was that Grant fella's doing, but others say it was one of Hargrove's men trying to collect insurance money." Martha grabbed Katherine's arm. "Look there," she hissed, pointing toward the company office. Through the confusion and smoke, Katherine could see Hargrove on the porch, engaged in a heated argument with Nathan Grant and several other men she didn't recognize. One wore a badge that caught the firelight, a marshal, perhaps. "Now's our chance," Martha said urgently. With everyone distracted, Katherine understood immediately. Some workers had attempted escape before, heading into the mountains to flee their contracts. Few succeeded. The company had trackers, and runaways were made examples of. "I can't," Katherine said, though everything in her yearned for freedom. "They'd catch us before we reached the next town. Maybe not this time." Martha nodded toward Grant and his companions. "Something's different." Before Katherine could respond, a guard spotted them standing apart from the firefighting effort. "You two, get to the well. Everyone works the bucket line." For the next hour, Katherine passed buckets of water, her arms screaming in protest with each movement. By the time the sun rose fully, the fire was mostly contained. Though the company store was a total loss, nothing but charred timbers and smoldering goods. Hargrove addressed the assembled workers from the steps of his office, his face mottled with rage. This was deliberate sabotage. "Anyone with information will be rewarded. Anyone caught withholding information will face severe consequences." His eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on Katherine. "Some of you may have heard rumors about challenges to your contracts. Let me be clear. Your obligations remain in full effect. The mine will operate as usual today despite this setback." A murmur of disbelief ran through the crowd. After a night fighting the fire, they were expected to work a full shift. "What about food?" someone called out. "The store's gone. Rations will be distributed at midday," Hargrove snapped. "Now get to your stations. Foreman, take attendance. Anyone missing will be considered attempting escape." As the crowd reluctantly began to disperse, Katherine felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Nathan Grant standing behind her. "Miss Novak," he said quietly, "I need you to come with me." Katherine glanced at the guards watching the workers file toward the mine. "I can't. They'll mark me absent. Trust me." His eyes held hers, steady and determined. "This is important." Against her better judgment, Katherine nodded. Grant led her away from the main group, toward a cluster of horses tethered near the office. The man with the badge stood waiting along with two others. "This is Marshal Edwards," Grant introduced. "He's here on behalf of the territorial governor." The marshal nodded to Katherine. "Miss Novak, Mr. Grant here says you might be willing to provide testimony about conditions in the mine." Katherine hesitated, fear warring with the desire for justice. "What kind of testimony?" "Hours worked, safety conditions, how the debt system operates," Grant explained. "The territorial legislature is considering a bill to outlaw debt peonage, but we need first-hand accounts to strengthen our case." "And what happens to me if I speak against Hargrove?" Katherine asked. "I still have years left on my contract." Grant and the marshal exchanged glances. "That's what we need to discuss," Grant said. "But not here. Will you come with us to town? Just for a few hours." Katherine looked back at the mine entrance where the last of the workers were disappearing into the darkness. She thought of Martha's words, "Change is never painless." "Yes," she decided. "I'll come." They rode double, Katherine behind Grant on his sturdy bay gelding, to the town of Silver Canyon, a mile from the mine. It was her first time leaving company property in over 2 years, and the sight of normal life shopkeepers opening their businesses, children heading to school, brought a lump to her throat. The Silver Eagle Hotel was the largest building in town, 3 stories of painted clapboard with a wide porch. Grant helped Katherine dismount, steadying her when her legs wobbled from the unaccustomed activity. "This way," he said, guiding her inside to a private dining room where a breakfast spread awaited. "Eat first, then we'll talk." Katherine stared at the food: fresh bread, eggs, bacon, coffee that smelled like heaven, unable to remember the last time she'd seen such abundance. "I couldn't possibly, please," Grant said softly. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in months." "I haven't," she admitted, sinking into a chair. While she ate, Grant and the marshal conversed quietly at the other end of the table. Katherine caught fragments: illegal contracts, governor's authority, federal intervention, but focused mainly on the miracle of real food. Each bite seemed to restore a small measure of her strength. When she'd finished, Grant moved to sit across from her, his expression serious but kind. "Katherine, may I call you Katherine?" At her nod, he continued, "I need to be honest with you about what we're doing here." He explained that he had once been a simple rancher, until his younger brother had died in a mining accident under circumstances similar to Silver Canyon's operations. Since then, he dedicated himself to reforming labor practices in the territory, eventually gaining a position as special advisor to the governor on labor matters. "The territorial legislature has been hesitant to act against companies like Hargrove's," he said. "Too many politicians have investments in the mines, but with enough evidence of abuse and illegal practices, the governor is prepared to take executive action." "And you think my testimony would help?" "I know it would." Grant leaned forward. "But I won't pretend there's no risk to you. Hargrove won't take this lying down." "What about my contract?" Katherine asked the question that mattered most. "Even if conditions improve, I'm still bound to work for years." Grant exchanged glances with the marshal before answering. "That's where things get complicated. We believe your contract and those of many others may be legally unenforceable, but proving that in court could take months, even years." Katherine's heart sank. She'd expected as much. "However," Grant continued, "there is another possibility." He reached into his jacket and removed a folded document. "This is a copy of your contract that we obtained from county records. Your father's original debt was indeed $500. "Yes," Katherine confirmed. "But with interest and charges, most of which are illegally calculated," Grant interrupted. "But even setting that aside, there's a simpler solution." He placed a small leather pouch on the table. It clinked heavily as it landed. $500. The original debt in full." Katherine stared at the pouch, unable to comprehend what he was suggesting. "I don't understand." "I want to buy your contract," Grant said simply. "Pay off your debt and terminate your obligation to Hargrove's company." "Buy me?" Katherine recoiled slightly. "Like property?" "No," Grant said firmly. "Not you. Your debt. Once paid, you would be free, beholden to no one. I'd tear up the contract on the spot." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Katherine asked, suspicion mixing with desperate hope. Grant's expression softened. "Because no one should live as you've been forced to, because what's happening at that mine is wrong, and because sometimes justice needs a helping hand. And what would you expect in return? Your testimony, if you're willing to give it, nothing more." Grant pushed the pouch closer to her. "The choice is yours, Katherine. I won't force you either way." Katherine looked at the money more than she'd seen in years, and then at the man offering her freedom. His eyes held no deceit that she could discern, only a steady resolve and something else. Respect, perhaps. Something she'd almost forgotten existed. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what happens next?" "We go back to the mine. I present the payment to Hargrove with the marshal as witness. Your contract is terminated. You walk away a free woman. And the others?" Katherine thought of Martha and the dozens more trapped in the same system. "What about them?" "One step at a time," Grant said. "Your testimony helps build our case. With enough evidence, the governor can suspend all such contracts pending review." Katherine took a deep breath. The decision seemed almost too enormous to make, but in her heart, she'd already chosen. "I'll do it," she said. "Both things accept your offer and testify." Grant smiled then, a warm expression that transformed his weathered face. "Good. Let's not waste any time." The ride back to the mine was tense with anticipation. Katherine rode double with Grant again, acutely aware of his solid presence as they approached the company gates. Marshal Edwards rode alongside them, his badge prominently displayed. Two other men deputies, Katherine now understood, followed closely. The guard at the gate attempted to block their entry. "Mr. Hargrove isn't receiving visitors today." "This isn't a social call," the marshal replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Official territorial business. Step aside." Reluctantly, the guard complied, sending another man running toward the office to warn Hargrove. By the time they reached the yard, the mine owner was waiting on his porch, flanked by Dobbs and two armed guards. "Marshal," Hargrove acknowledged coldly. "I hope you have an arrest warrant for this man." He gestured toward Grant. "Arson is a serious charge." "I'm not here about the fire," Edwards replied, "though I'd be interested to know why you leaped to accuse Mr. Grant without evidence." Hargrove's face darkened. "State your business then." Grant dismounted, then helped Katherine down. "I've come to settle Miss Novak's contract," he announced, retrieving the leather pouch. $500 the original debt in full." A flash of alarm crossed Hargrove's face before he masked it with contempt. "Impossible. The girl owes far more with accumulated interest and expenses." "The original debt is all that's legally binding," Marshal Edwards stated. "The territorial court ruled on this matter last month in Carson City. Any interest exceeding 10% annually is considered usurious and void." "This is absurd," Hargrove sputtered. "You can't simply accept payment in full for services owed," Grant countered. "That's exactly what a contract allows, Mr. Hargrove. Unless you'd like to argue that these arrangements are actually indentured servitude, which is illegal under territorial law." Katherine watched the standoff with her heart hammering in her chest. Around the yard, miners had paused in their tasks to observe the confrontation. Among them, she spotted Martha, eyes wide with disbelief. Hargrove's gaze darted between Grant, the marshal, and the growing crowd of witnesses. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly in defeat. "Dobbs," he barked, "fetch the girl's contract." The foreman disappeared into the office, returning moments later with a document that Katherine recognized with a surge of emotion, the paper that had ruled her life for 2 years. Grant counted out the money on the porch railing, gold and silver coins that represented Katherine's freedom. Marshal Edwards verified the amount, then nodded to Hargrove. "It's all there. Accept the payment and release Miss Novak from her obligations." With visible reluctance, Hargrove scooped the money into his hand and shoved the contract at Grant. "Take her then. But this changes nothing for the rest of my operation." Grant accepted the paper, then turned to Katherine with a smile. Deliberately, while everyone watched, he tore the contract in half, then quarters, then eighths, until the pieces fluttered to the ground like strange confetti. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the watching miners. Hargrove's face contorted with rage. "Get back to work," he shouted. "All of you, or face the consequences." The workers reluctantly dispersed, though many cast hopeful glances at Katherine and Grant. Martha caught Katherine's eye and offered a small, proud nod before turning back toward the mine. "You're free to go, Miss Novak," Marshal Edwards said formally. "Mr. Hargrove has no further claim on you." The words seemed unreal, like something from a dream. Katherine stood frozen, uncertain what to do with this sudden liberty. Grant seemed to understand her paralysis. "Is there anything you need to collect from the dormitory?" he asked gently. Katherine thought of her few possessions, the photograph of her parents, a hairbrush, a change of clothes. "Yes," she managed. "Just a few things." "I'll come with you," he offered, glancing at Hargrove's thunderous expression. "Just to be safe." Under the baleful stares of the company guards, Katherine gathered her meager belongings, wrapping them in a small bundle. The dormitory felt different now, a prison she was leaving behind rather than the only shelter available to her. She touched her narrow cot one last time, thinking of the women who would remain. "I'll help them if I can," Grant said quietly, reading her thoughts. "But it starts with you." "Your testimony, your story," Katherine nodded, straightening her shoulders. "I'm ready." As they walked back into the yard, Katherine saw that Grant's horse had been joined by a small mare she hadn't noticed before. "She's yours if you'd like," Grant said, nodding toward the chestnut horse. "I thought you might need transportation." Katherine approached the mare cautiously, stroking her velvety nose. "I can't accept such a gift. It's too much." "Consider it a loan, then," Grant suggested. "At least until you decide where you're headed next." The question struck Katherine with unexpected force. Where was she headed? For so long, her future had been predetermined by her contract. Now, possibilities stretched before her like an open road. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought beyond survival for years." "You have time to decide now," Grant said, helping her mount the mare. "But first, would you consider staying in Silver Canyon for a few days? The marshal needs to take your formal statement and He hesitated, something like uncertainty crossing his features. "I'd like the chance to ensure you're settled before I return to Carson City." Katherine studied his face, this man who had torn up her contract and handed her back her life. There was kindness there, and integrity, and something else that made her pulse quicken slightly. "Yes," she decided. "I'll stay for a while." As they rode away from the mine, Katherine didn't look back. The weight of her years in captivity seemed to grow lighter with each hoofbeat, though she knew the memories would remain. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also hope, a commodity more precious than any silver the mine could produce. In town, Grant arranged a room for Katherine at the Silver Eagle and introduced her to the hotel's proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Holloway, who clucked sympathetically at Katherine's thin frame and worn clothes. "A hot bath first," the older woman declared. "Then a proper meal. Mr. Grant, you make yourself scarce for a few hours while I tend to this poor girl." Grant tipped his hat with a smile. "Yes, madam." "I'll be back this evening to check on Miss Novak, if that's acceptable." Katherine found herself nodding, strangely reluctant to see him go. "Thank you," she said, the words woefully inadequate for what he'd done. "For everything." "We're just getting started," he replied, his eyes warm. "Rest now. You're safe here." The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences. Katherine gave her testimony to Marshal Edwards, recounting in painful detail the conditions at the mine, the manipulated debts, the abuse suffered by the workers. The marshal's face grew grimmer with each revelation, his notes more extensive. "This will help," he assured her when they finished. "The governor can't ignore evidence this compelling." Grant remained in Silver Canyon, dividing his time between gathering additional testimonies from former mine workers and checking on Katherine's recovery. Each day, she felt a little stronger, the regular meals and rest beginning to restore her health. On her third evening of freedom, Katherine sat on the hotel's back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The beauty of it struck her anew. How long had it been since she'd had time to simply appreciate such things? "Beautiful view," Grant's voice came from behind her. He stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Holloway said I'd find you here." Katherine accepted the offered cup gratefully. "I'm trying to reacquaint myself with simple pleasures, sunsets, coffee that doesn't taste like mud, the luxury of sitting still without fearing punishment." Grant settled into the chair beside her, his expression thoughtful. It will take time. The body heals faster than the mind sometimes. You sound like you speak from experience. He nodded, gazing at the mountains. After my brother died, I was lost for a while, angry, determined to make someone pay. He sipped his coffee. It took time to channel that into something constructive. And now you save people from mining companies, Katherine said softly. I try. Grant turned to face her. Katherine, there's something I need to discuss with you. About your future plans. Her heart sank slightly. This was it. He would tell her it was time to move on, that his obligation to her was fulfilled. Of course. I'm returning to Carson City tomorrow, he said. The marshal has what he needs and I'm required at a legislative session. I understand. Katherine kept her voice steady, though disappointment washed through her. I won't forget what you've done for me. That's not, Grant shook his head, seeming frustrated with himself. What I'm trying to say is, I'd like you to consider coming with me. Katherine blinked in surprise. To Carson City? Yes, I have connections there who could help you find suitable employment. And he hesitated, then continued with determined honesty. And I find myself reluctant to part ways just yet. If you'd allow it, I'd like to get to know you better, not as someone I helped, but as yourself. Katherine Novak. The unexpected offer left her momentarily speechless. She studied his face in the fading light, searching for any hint of pity or obligation, but found only sincerity and a warmth that made her pulse quicken. Why? She asked finally. You've already done more than enough. You don't owe me anything further. This isn't about obligation, Grant said firmly. It's about, he paused, searching for words. I admire your strength, Katherine. You endured conditions that would break most people, yet here you sit, appreciating a sunset. There's a resilience in you that's remarkable. Heat rose in Katherine's cheeks at the unexpected praise. You make too much of me. I merely survived. No, Grant shook his head. There's nothing mere about what you did, and I'd like the chance to discover who Katherine Novak is when she's free to be herself. His eyes held hers. If you're not interested, I understand completely. You've had enough of men making decisions about your life. Katherine considered his words carefully. Carson City would offer opportunities that Silver Canyon couldn't. And Grant. There was something about him that drew her, a steadiness that made her feel secure for the first time in years. I'd like to go to Carson City, she said finally. And I'd like the chance to know Nathan Grant better as well. His smile was like the sunrise, warm and full of promise. Then it's settled. We'll leave tomorrow if you're ready. As darkness settled over the mountains, they sat in comfortable silence, each contemplating the journey ahead, not just the physical distance to Carson City, but the path from strangers to something else. Something neither was quite ready to name, but both felt stirring to life between them. The trip to Carson City took 3 days. They traveled at an easy pace, mindful of Katherine's still recovering strength. Grant proved to be a considerate companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his ranching days. By the second day, Katherine found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in years. It's good to hear that sound, Grant remarked, his eyes crinkling with pleasure. What sound? Katherine asked. Your laughter. It transforms your whole face. Katherine ducked her head, unaccustomed to such observations. The mind didn't offer much opportunity for amusement. Then we'll have to make up for lost time, Grant promised. Carson City appeared on the horizon late on the third day, a proper city with paved streets, government buildings, and an air of permanence that Silver Canyon lacked. Grant led them to a handsome 2-story house on a tree-lined street. My home, he explained as they dismounted. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who lives in the back cottage. You'll stay in the guest room until we can arrange more permanent accommodations for you." Katherine hesitated, suddenly aware of how this might appear to others. "Are you certain? People might talk." Grant's expression turned serious. "Mrs. Chen is the soul of propriety and will ensure everything is above reproach. But if you're uncomfortable, I can arrange a hotel instead." "No," Katherine decided. "I trust your judgment, and I confess I'm not eager to be alone just yet, Mrs." Chen proved to be a tiny, energetic Chinese woman who clucked over Katherine's thinness much as Mrs. Holloway had done. "Too skinny. Need food rest," she declared, ushering Katherine to a comfortable bedroom and promising a hot meal soon. Over the following weeks, Katherine began to build a new life in Carson City. Grant introduced her to Mrs. Winters, a milliner who needed an assistant in her shop. The work was pleasant and dignified, nothing like the back-breaking labor of the mine. Katherine's nimble fingers proved adept at trimming hats, and she enjoyed the conversations with customers. Grant himself was often busy with legislative matters, but made time each evening to dine with Katherine, eager to hear about her day. Sometimes they walked afterward through the city park, their conversations ranging from books to politics to their hopes for the future. "The governor has suspended operations at Silver Canyon pending investigation," Grant told her one evening, about a month after their arrival. "Martha and the others have been released from their contracts temporarily." Katherine's heart leapt. "That's wonderful news. What happens next?" "A full hearing before the territorial court. Your testimony was crucial, Katherine. It opened the door for others to come forward." "And Hargrove?" Grant's expression hardened slightly. "Fighting every step, of course, but the evidence is overwhelming. I believe justice will prevail." As autumn turned the trees golden, Katherine found herself settling into her new life with increasing confidence. She had a small income, comfortable lodgings, and the freedom to make her own choices. Yet her thoughts increasingly turned to Nathan Grant and the unspoken connection growing between them. He had been unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon her gratitude or vulnerability. But she'd caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart beat faster, a look of admiration, tinged with something deeper. One evening in late October, Grant invited Katherine to dine at Carson City's finest restaurant, an establishment with white tablecloths and crystal glasses that made her newly purchased dress seem inadequate, despite Mrs. Winters' assurances to the contrary. "You look beautiful," Grant said as he helped her from the carriage, his eyes appreciative of the blue silk that complemented her dark hair. "Thank you," Katherine replied, smoothing the fabric nervously, "though I feel somewhat out of place." "You belong anywhere you choose to be," Grant said firmly, offering his arm. "Never doubt that again." The dinner was lovely, delicious food, attentive service, and conversation that flowed easily between them. As they finished their dessert, Grant grew slightly more serious. "Katherine, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." She set down her spoon, recognizing his tone. "That sounds important." "It is." He hesitated, then continued. "The court has ruled on the Silver Canyon case. Hargrove's debt contracts have been invalidated. All workers are released from their obligations, and the company must pay substantial damages." "That's wonderful," Katherine exclaimed, then noted his still serious expression. "Isn't it?" "Yes, absolutely, but it also means—" Grant took a breath. "It means you truly have complete freedom now. Your future is entirely your own to decide." Understanding dawned. "You're concerned I've stayed in Carson City out of obligation to you, or lack of alternatives," Grant nodded. "I wanted you to know that your debt to Hargrove is legally erased. You could return to your family's land if you wished, or go anywhere else that calls to you. I would help with any arrangements, of course. Katherine studied him across the table, this man who had given her freedom, and then stepped back to ensure she could use it as she chose. In that moment, she realized with perfect clarity what she wanted. "Nathan," she said, using his first name deliberately, "my choice to remain in Carson City has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with preference." "Preference," he repeated, a hopeful note in his voice. "Yes." Katherine gathered her courage. "I prefer being here. I prefer the life I'm building. And most of all, I prefer the company I keep, especially yours." The tension in Grant's shoulders visibly eased. "I'm very glad to hear that." "In fact," Katherine continued, emboldened by his response, "I've been hoping that our companionship might evolve. If that's something you would welcome as well." Grant reached across the table to take her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Katherine, from the moment I saw you in that mine, I was struck by your courage. As I've come to know you better, my admiration has only grown. So yes, I would very much welcome an evolution in our relationship." Katherine felt a smile bloom across her face. "Then we are in agreement." "We are." Grant's thumb traced small circles on her palm. "Though I suggest we proceed at whatever pace feels comfortable to you. You've had enough of men dictating terms in your life." "I appreciate that," Katherine said softly, "but I'm not as fragile as you might think." "No," Grant agreed, his eyes warm. "You're the strongest person I know." Their courtship progressed with purpose after that evening. Grant was attentive but patient, never rushing Katherine beyond her comfort. For her part, Katherine found herself blossoming under his regard, rediscovering aspects of herself that the mine had nearly crushed: her quick wit, her love of music, her capacity for joy. Winter arrived in Carson City with a blanket of snow that transformed the streets into a wonderland. Katherine had saved enough from her wages to rent a small apartment near Mrs. Winter's shop, though she often spent evenings at Grant's home, enjoying quiet dinners and conversations before the fireplace. On Christmas Eve, Grant invited Katherine for a special dinner. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself, preparing a feast that left the dining table groaning. After they'd eaten, Grant led Katherine to the parlor where a tall pine tree stood decorated with candles and ornaments. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small package from beneath the tree. Katherine accepted it with surprise, but we agreed not to exchange gifts. "This isn't exactly a gift," Grant said, a nervous quality to his smile that she'd never seen before. "Open it." Katherine carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small velvet box. Her heart began to race as she opened it to find a ring, a delicate gold band set with a modest diamond flanked by two small sapphires. "Nathan," she breathed, looking up to find him watching her intently. "Katherine Novak," he said, taking her free hand in his, "when I tore up your contract that day, I freed you from an obligation forced upon you. Today, I'm asking if you would consider a different kind of contract, one entered freely, based on mutual respect and love." He dropped to one knee, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you, Katherine. Your strength, your kindness, your determination. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes, not tears of sorrow as she'd shed so many times in the mine, but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I would be honored to be your wife." Grant's face broke into a radiant smile as he rose and took the ring from the box, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the gold warm against her skin. When he kissed her, Katherine felt the last shadows of her time at Silver Canyon falling away, replaced by the promise of a future brighter than she'd ever dared to imagine. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the Nevada hills. The ceremony was held in the territorial capital's garden, with Governor Bradley himself in attendance, a political statement as much as a social one, affirming the territory's commitment to ending practices like those at Silver Canyon Mine. Martha traveled from Silver Canyon for the wedding, now working as a cook in a respectable boarding house. "I knew that first day something special was happening," she told Katherine as they embraced. "Never seen a man look at a woman the way he looked at you in that mine." Other former mine workers attended as well, many now employed in safer conditions with fair wages, thanks to the new territorial regulations Grant had helped draft. Hargrove himself had fled to California, facing multiple lawsuits and possible criminal charges. As Katherine spoke her vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of the mine to this sunlit garden, from indentured laborer to beloved bride, a transformation that still sometimes seemed miraculous. "I, Katherine, take you, Nathan, to be my husband," she said, her voice clear and confident. "To share my life and love with you, to stand by your side in joy and hardship, to build a future together based on respect, honesty, and abiding love." Grant's eyes shone as he repeated his own vows, his hands steady around hers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to Katherine like the perfect counterpoint to that long-ago moment when Grant had torn her contract to pieces. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. Grant continued his work with the territorial government, eventually being elected to the legislature himself on a platform of labor reform and economic justice. Katherine found purpose in establishing a fund to help former contract workers rebuild their lives, using her first-hand experience to guide others toward independence. They made their home in Carson City, expanding Grant's house to accommodate the family they both hoped for. Katherine's strength, once depleted by the mine, returned fully, and a year after their wedding she discovered she was expecting their first child. "A son or daughter to inherit your courage," Grant said, his hand gentle on her growing belly, "and to know nothing of the hardships you endured." "But they'll know the story," Katherine insisted. "All of it. So they understand that freedom isn't guaranteed, it must be protected and sometimes fought for." Their son, James, arrived on a winter night with a healthy cry that filled their home with joy. Katherine, cradling him in her arms, felt the circle of her life completing itself, the orphaned daughter of a debtor, now creating a new family founded on love rather than obligation. As James grew, so did the Grant family's reputation for hospitality and advocacy. Their home became a gathering place for reformers, politicians, and former mine workers alike. Katherine never forgot her time at Silver Canyon, but rather than allowing it to haunt her, she transformed the experience into purpose, testifying before the territorial legislature, writing articles for newspapers, ensuring that such practices became increasingly difficult to maintain. 5 years after James's birth, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth, named for Nathan's mother. With her arrival, Katherine felt her cup of happiness overflowing. The shadows of the past receded further with each passing year, though she kept the torn pieces of her mining contract in a small box as a reminder of where she'd begun. On the 10th anniversary of the day Grant had torn up her contract, they returned to Silver Canyon. The town had changed dramatically. The mine operated under new ownership with proper safety measures and fair wages. Former debt workers now owned businesses or held positions of respect in the community. Standing on the hillside overlooking the mine entrance, Katherine took her husband's hand. "It doesn't seem possible," she murmured, "that I was once down there believing I would die before my contract ended." Grant squeezed her fingers gently. "You survived, and then you thrived." "Because of you," Katherine said, turning to face him. "No. Grant shook his head, his eyes filled with the same admiration she'd first glimpsed a decade earlier. "I may have torn up a piece of paper, Katherine, but you built this life, our life, with your own strength. I simply had the good fortune to walk beside you." Katherine smiled, thinking of their children waiting at home with Mrs. Chen, of the legislation bearing Grant's name that protected workers throughout the territory, of the women she'd helped free from situations like her own. "We built it together," she corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And we're not finished yet." As they rode away from Silver Canyon for the final time, Katherine didn't look back. The past had served its purpose, teaching her resilience and the value of freedom. Now, with her husband at her side and their children waiting at home, she faced forward, toward a future limited only by the horizons they chose to pursue. The mining contract that had once seemed to be her death sentence had instead become the unlikely beginning of a life richer than any silver vein. And Nathan Grant, the cowboy who had bought and torn that contract on a dusty mine yard a decade earlier, remained what he had become that very day, not her owner or savior, but her partner in creating a life defined not by obligation, but by love freely given and joyfully returned.